Welcome back to the Crocoblock Jet Engine for Beginners series. In this video, we're digging into listings. Now, if you've missed the previous videos in this series, there's a link in the description and also in the corner right now. Now, if you're new to the concept of listings in Jet Engine, they are basically a design template for the archive pages of your website and can be incredibly powerful to not only build unique designs, but also add in all manner of content types, from WordPress metadata to custom metadata created with Jet Engine. There are some more advanced uses of the listings feature that I'll touch upon today, but I will be covering those in more detail in their own dedicated video, as they are just a little bit beyond what's needed to get started today. So let's get started by hopping over into our WordPress dashboard and take a look at creating our first listing design. So heading over to Jet Engine, we're going to come in and choose the option for listings. Inside there, we get a list of all of the listing items we've created, including the source, the title, for what post or type or taxonomy, the author, and the date. Now, currently we have nothing listed inside here, but as you start to create more comprehensive sites, you're going to start to fill this up, and this information becomes very useful when you want to find your way around to a particular template. So let's just say add new, and from there, we now get the option to choose what type of listing source, what post types, to give it a name, and choose what editor we want to use. So if we open up the posts, first of all, you'll see we have options of posts, the query builder, terms, users, and repeater fields. We can create listing item templates for any or all of those different sources. So let's take a look at posts first of all. When we choose the listing source of posts, we can now choose from what type of post type we want to grab the information to create this layout. You can see posts is set as default, and this is the inbuilt posts feature inside WordPress itself. So you can use this listing item to create customized layouts just for the inbuilt features inside WordPress itself. If we open this up, you can see we have posts, pages, and so on, all the usual culprits. We also have properties, which is the post type that we created at the beginning of this series of videos. So let's select properties, and next up we're going to give this a name. We're going to call this default property listing, and then we can choose between Elementor and blocks inside Gutenberg. Now I'm going to use Elementor for this example because we're going to create template files as we go through this entire series of videos. But if you prefer to use Gutenberg blocks, by all means do so. And we will take a look in a future video briefly how you can use Gutenberg to work alongside Jet Engine and some of the features we have in comparison to working with Elementor. But for now, we're going to choose the Elementor editor. We're now going to choose to create our listing. That will create our template in a normal fashion you'd expect using Elementor. All our normal options are down the left-hand side. And while we can use a lot of these options, it makes more sense to use the listing element options that we have as part of Jet Engine. Now, at first you might think you have a lot less options just using these, but the reality is there's a lot more features inside these than you may give them credit for. For example, the dynamic field allows us to choose pretty much any kind of dynamic field. Dynamic links, we can set that up to create any kind of dynamic link, then style it as a button and so on. The same goes for meta and also dynamic images. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to create the template for our first listing item. So let's just drag in the dynamic image to start off with. Now once we do that, you can see this gives us a load of useful information down the left hand side. We've also got some more options hidden away underneath the settings section. So at the moment we're looking at this probably totally out of scale to the way it would look on a normal listing setup where you may have 3 or 4 columns. So we can rectify that in a couple of different ways. We don't want to limit ourselves by actually styling or setting up the width of the container element itself. It makes more sense to come into the settings section, and inside there we've got a new option called listing settings. We expand that, we can choose the source where it's going to get our information from. Now currently this says posts and from the post type of properties because we set that up right at the beginning when we created this listing template item. But you could change this if you wanted to without any hassle whatsoever. You can see again we have all those same options we had right back at the beginning, and we can also come in and choose different post types and so on. What I'm interested in though is the preview width. So we're going to set this to a value of 400 pixels. This is probably in keeping to the typical size I'd be using when I'm creating a kind of website that has a listing setup. If you've seen any of my previous tutorials on creating things like listing websites, business listing websites, real estate sites and so on, they're all kind of fit around the 400 pixel wide setup. But you can set that to whatever you want. You also have the option to make the listing item clickable. Now this can be a bit of a blessing and a curse. It's very useful if you want to set this up to be every element inside there is clickable. But that can have problems sometimes especially when you're dealing with front-end forms and so on. So use this with caution if you need to use it at all. We're going to leave this disabled for now while we build this out. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back and select our image. And you can see now, if we take a look at the content options, this is set to use the post thumbnail. However, we can use other options depending upon the type of listing that we're creating. So for example, if you're creating a listing of users, it would make more sense to use their user avatar. Or if you set up and created custom options as part of Jet Engine, you could use that inside here as well. However, the post thumbnail is perfectly fine for this example, so we'll leave that as it is. You can also use a custom meta field or custom repeater key inside here. So if you know what the meta field name is or the repeater key name is, you can drop that inside there and that will take precedence. We can also drop in things like URL prefixes. So sometimes you might want to contain a larger URL than you're actually going to use in various different circumstances. And as you can see, it says add a prefix to the image URL, for example, for the cases when source contains only part of the URL. So depending upon how you store your data inside your database, you might need to augment the listing, the URL that's supplied as part of your database listing with some additional information. And you can do that by inserting that inside there. We can then choose the image size. Now currently full would be a little overkill and we'd end up loading much larger images in than we would need for this 400 pixel wide setup. So we can choose from any of the predefined sizes that we have and any custom sizes that the theme you may be using creates for you. So we're going to go for something like medium large. So that's going to give us a good balance between quality and file size. Now what you can do is you can make the image linked, which in general use cases would be very useful. So if we enable that, we can then say what source are we going to use for the link itself. Now generally permalink is going to be perfectly acceptable, but you do have a lot more options. And if you have custom URLs, custom links, you could drop those inside here and pull reference from any of your database fields, any of your custom post type information, or lots of different fields you have inside WordPress itself and Jet Engine. So there's a ton of options inside there, but in a lot of use cases, the permalink is going to be more than enough. So we'll select that, and that's exactly what we want. And that'll take us over then to the full detail page of this particular property in this example. You can also drop in custom meta field and repeater keys inside here as well. So if you wanted to reference a unique key field, you could do that, pulling that information from your custom post type or anywhere else that you have meta fields stored. And the same goes for the link URL prefix. In the same way that we have the image URL prefix, we can add in and augment the actual listing link itself. Do you want to open this in a new window? Entirely up to you. And also you can add relative attributes, and you can see there's a lot of different attributes we can apply to this. So you can get really creative on how you want to set things up. Then finally, you've got the alignment option, which you can control based upon the different devices that you're using, and you can set these to be start, center, or end. Lots of different options. And if we take a look underneath, we have the ability to hide the value if empty. So for example, we don't end up with a blank placeholder, so we can enable that if we want, or we can just simply supply a fallback image if for any reason a property that's created and added doesn't have an image associated with it. And then finally, you've got your context, and you can see we can set this up for various different things, whether it's the queried user, the current post author, and so on. Now for this example, this is not really needed. Then we've obviously got the full complement of styling options and those kinds of things. So that gives you a kind of overview of how you can insert an image and just some of the options that you have to control the dynamic nature of the content inside your listing item. Now once you've added the image in, you're probably going to want to add some more additional fields. So let's come back to choose our widgets and let's take a look at this dynamic field option. Let's drag that into our layout, and you can see what this does now is it pulls in what it thinks is the right info, which in this case is the title of this particular post. And again, if we take a look at the source information on the left hand side, the content, you can see we have post term user object data, but we can choose from additional data sources such as metadata for the custom posts we have, the custom fields we have inside there, options if we've set that up, and options is something we'll take a look at a little later as part of this series. And if you're dealing with relationships or hierarchies and things like that, you can also pull the data inside here as well. And again, we'll look at these options in future videos in more detail. We're going to set this to be the post term user, and the object field title is perfectly fine. However, we can again choose from pretty much all the options we have, not only from our post type, but also from terms, user information, comment IDs, dates, tons and tons of options inside here. Really, really powerful set of features. We can, if we want to, set a field icon up inside here, and you can also set how you want this to be wrapped and displayed. So you can see by default, it says, can you use the HTML tag of a div? So if you were sort of making changes to this using CSS and so on, you'd have to attach that CSS to the div tag. However, you can change that to H1 through 6, paragraph or span. Now for this example, we're going to set this to H3. You would go ahead and apply some styling to this. It's up to you how you wanted to do it. I just want to show you how to create it without worrying too much about the look and feel of it. But you can choose the HTML tag inside there. Again, we've got the option to hide if the value is empty, which is always great to see. It gives us that conditional information. And if we want to, we can apply a fallback value inside here. So it's up to you, depending upon your use case, whether you would need a fallback and it would make sense, or you just hide it if the data isn't available. Then we've got two key sections that open up a ton of possibilities. Now, we briefly touched upon some of the options available inside these two sections in a previous video where I covered glossaries and just showed you basically how to use some of the information inside here and some of the settings. I'm not going to go into tons of detail because as I go through this series of videos, we're going to use various different field outputs as part of setting various different things up. And I'll cover a couple in this particular section. But what we have is when we create data and save that in a meta field, there's various different things you can do, different ways you can format it and structure it. And this is where the callback option comes in incredibly handy. You can format numeric data, you can format date formats, you can do things with different arrays of information, which I touched upon in that glossary section. And as you can see, even though you can't see all of them on screen right now, there are lots and lots of options available to us. And we're going to take a look, like I say, at some of these as we go through things. Now, we don't need this for this particular example, so I'm going to disable that. And you can see that now brings back the data. Then the customized field output is incredibly useful in a lot of different use cases. This little strange symbol here is called a macro when it comes to working with Jet Engine. And what this particular macro does is it outputs the information from this specific source and this particular object field. In our case, the title field. So if we wanted to, we could also put things before this or after it. We can use HTML code, we can use just normal words, whatever we want to do. So we could just say property name, for example, and you can see now that adds that on at the beginning of the industrial array, which is the name of this particular property. We don't need to use that again in this example because it's outputting exactly what we want, but there's a lot of use cases where this is incredibly useful. So again, we're just going to disable this feature until we need it in a future setup. And again, we've got the same context as we saw earlier on, where we've got default object and current user and so on. Again, what we're doing here is not needed to use any of this, but it is useful, and we'll take a look at that in future videos. Once we've done that, we've now got another piece of information in there. Let's go ahead and add another option in. This time we're going to pull in, again, dynamic field. I'm going to drag and drop that underneath there. You can see, again, that pulls in what it thinks is right, which is the first object it considers to be correct, which is the name. We want to change that, though. We're going to use the post-term user object again, but this time we're going to change this to the content. And once we do that, you can see that now pulls in all the content for this property, which is way too much for a listing item. So we need some way of handling that information. So there's a couple of things we can do here right now. We can change the HTML tag and set this to be a paragraph. So all that text inside there is a paragraph, or we can leave it as a div, or we can set it as a span. It's up to us how we want to work with this. So for this example, I'm going to leave this set as a div. We're not going to worry about hiding if the value is empty, but what we are going to do is we're going to filter this field output. So we're going to open this option up, and then we're going to use the callback option inside there. Now you can see once we enable this, because it doesn't know what to do, it just puts this gray box to say, there's something going on, but I don't know how to output this data. I'm waiting for you to tell me what to do. So we're going to do just that. We're going to open this up. We're going to scroll right to the bottom, and unfortunately you probably can't see this because it goes off the screen. But we're going to choose an option called trim string by characters, or trim string by chars, which is just short for characters. And then it says what's the string length. So you can see this says 20, and what that's doing is it's the 20 characters being displayed at the moment, and then we've got several dots at the end of it. Now we can change that value because obviously 20 characters is not a lot. It doesn't really do a lot. So let's just say we wanted to put 150 characters in there. Once you do that, we now get more characters inside there, and that can be a lot more useful. So you can see we can use combination of dynamic source data, choosing the object field, and then go ahead and apply a callback to it to control how this information is going to be displayed. Really, really useful. Next up, we're going to come back in, and this time we're going to do something along the lines of create a dynamic link. So we're going to drag and drop that inside there, and you can see it creates a read more link. And once we drop that in there, you can see the content on the left-hand side changes and gives us a lot more information and a lot more uses specific to this particular widget. So again, we have that source option. It says, where's the link in this example going to come from? By default, permalink is set up in there. But again, all those options for all our custom fields and loads of different locations to get data from are all available. So again, if you create a custom link and you want to use this dynamic link feature, you can set that up and choose the source for that particular link. But in this example, the permalink is perfectly fine. We can, if we want to, again, put in that custom meta field or repeat a key. We can change the label, so we can just say we want to change that to view property. You can, if you want to, also use dynamic tags when you're working with Elementor Pro. So if you wanted to dynamically set this using the options feature that's part of Jet Engine, you could do that inside here. So you could pull that data from other locations. You can also choose to use query arguments. So if you wanted to augment this particular link with additional query arguments, you could enable that, and you can see what that does is it opens up and says, well, what do you want to actually pass over? What data? And this is the default shortcode or macro that you're going to get as part of Jet Engine. And what this is going to do is it's going to send the post ID, which is the unique identifying number for this particular property. And then it's going to use the little macro code, which says current ID, and that's just going to pass over the current ID from this to whatever page you're linking through to. We don't need to use that in this example, but when we take a look at working with forms, this is something that comes in incredibly handy, and you will be using this a lot. But there's still loads more query arguments you could use if you wanted to. For now though, let's just disable that option. Now, while we're on the subject of macros, there's one other thing I want to show you before we carry on. We're going to come back up to this label. Now, you can see that we've got this dynamic tags option. If we expand that out from there, you can see there's a lot of useful options inside here. But if we come right the way down to the Jet Engine section, anywhere you have access to this information, you have all these extra option fields. Now, we talked about macros a couple of times in various different videos and different parts of this video, and I just want to show you something. You can see macros as an option inside here, and this is something that's been added fairly recently to Jet Engine, so you might not see this if you're running an older version. But what we can do is we can open up that macros, and inside there, this now gives us the settings panel. We can expand these macros out, and you can see there's a ton of pre-built macros inside here, all broken up into more logical naming structure. So things like the current meta, the related children from, queried term, post author ID, whether it's today, string to timestamp, lots and lots of really useful things inside there. We will be taking a look at some of these as we go through this series of videos, but I just wanted to quickly show you that just so you could get a feel for how you have access to those macros and also a ton more information as part of Jet Engine. Let's just get rid of that and set it back to view property. That's perfectly fine. So next up, after we've seen the query arguments, again, we have the option for the URL prefix. We can drop in an icon if we want to. Set the wrapper, open in a new window, all the kinds of things we've already seen, and again, hide if this is empty. You could then go ahead and style that to make it look more like a button if you wanted to. Really easy to do, but that's another one of those widgets that we have as Jet Engine, and it just gives us the ability to create more useful and powerful dynamic links over something quite basic. Okay, we're going to add one more dynamic widget inside here just so I can show you how to use some other features. So we're going to come back over into our widgets option, and we're going to grab the information again for dynamic field. We're going to put that above our view property button, and from there we're going to change the source now to a metadata field. This allows us to reference our custom meta fields that we set up as part of our post type. Once we choose that, you can see we now have meta field underneath, and we can choose the actual meta field itself. So for this example, we're going to choose the property features, which if you watch the glossary video, you'll have already seen how to do this, but this is basically where we're using the glossary array of information for those check boxes, and we're going to output something that makes a lot more sense. So for this example, you can see this is giving us an error now saying, well, something's wrong, I don't really know what to do. So we can set all the normal values inside here and hide things if they're empty and all those kinds of things. But what we want to do is filter the field output and format the data that's going inside here so Jet Engine and Elementor knows what information to actually output and how to go ahead and output it. So we're going to choose the option to filter field output. And then we've got a callback option again. We can use different options inside here depending upon the types of results that we want. So for example, multiple select field values, checkbox field values, or checked values list. So with this example, we're going to say checkbox field values. We'll select that, and you see that now pulls in the 3 values that are associated with this particular property. Well, now what we can do is we can change the delimiter if we want to. We could go ahead and add a field icon. So we could say, let's just look for a check mark, for example, and we'll just choose this option and insert that. And you can see now that puts a check mark before all of these. However, if we wanted to change that a little bit, we could just come down and say, let's just do a checked values list. We'll choose that option, and now that puts it into a list in a number of columns. It also puts a little check mark before each one of those, so we can say all of these are included. If you want to change the column count, you could do that. And we'll just set that to 3, for example, or set it to 2, how we want to do it. You can set things up inside there. You can apply dividers if you want to, and you can even customize the output. So we have a lot of really cool options, and you've seen now a couple of different use cases to use this filter field output option. Now, you're not limited to only using the widgets that are supplied as part of Jet Engine. We can just as easily come back in and include things like headings. So for example, this doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense without a heading. So let's just drag a normal heading widget in, drop that inside there, set that to be something like H4. And then what we can do is we can just say property features, and then we can style that any way we want. So let's just change the color on there to be the secondary color. We'll adjust this to be a little lighter and also a little smaller. So we'll put something like so, maybe a little bit heavier. And there we go. So we've now created a really simple setup for our listing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly apply some basic style into this so it looks a little bit nicer. And then we'll move on and see how we can use this inside our templates or our pages using Elementor. Okay, so there's just a simple little bit of formatting. So we're going to hit update on there, and that's our template created for our particular listing item. Now that we've seen how to create our listing design for our custom post, we need to create an archive template to display the content. Before we hop in and take a look at doing that, I just want to explain that you don't need to restrict yourself to only using listings with templates. You can just as easily create custom listing designs, apply various queries to them, and then use any normal WordPress page or post to add the listing to. It's super flexible, and I would encourage you to experiment and reuse your designs with different queries to open up a huge potential once you've taken a look at watching this video. So I've opened up the theme builder that's part of Elementor Pro. We're into the archive section, and we're going to create a new archive. Once we're inside there, we can just give this a name. We're going to call this default property archive, and we're going to say create our template. We can simply bypass this section. We're going to create something from scratch just so I can show you how everything works. Now with the archive created, you might be thinking, well, I'm going to need to use the built-in Elementor features to create an archive. No. We don't do that because we're using Jet Engine. We don't use that at all. We're going to do a search for listing, and you'll see there's our listing grid, which is the widget we want to use to reference the listing layouts we just created. So we're going to drag and drop that into our design. We're going to just make a little bit of space for this by adding some margins at top and below. So what it does now is it says, please select the listing to show. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the left-hand side into General, and underneath the listing section, we're going to open that up, and we're going to just start typing in what we want to search for. You can see there's property, there's our default property listing. It's always useful just to put the term listing inside the name that you give these, just because it makes life a little bit easier. So we're going to choose that option, and that now pulls in the relevant information. Now don't worry about the fact these icons are missing. That's just basically because I haven't set Elementor to use the older style icons. I just need to update that. Okay, so now we've inserted that. You can see that's pulled in this example, 2 of our properties, and if we had more, they would be listed inside here as well. So now on the left hand side, we can choose various different things. Column numbers, we can set the number of columns based upon the device. So you can see our mobile, desktop and tablet are all inside there, and we can choose anything between 1 and 10. And if we adjust these, you'll see our design changes, but obviously this doesn't look great because it's not set to be this big. So I'm going to set that back to 3, which is what I want to use. Now, because this is an archive template, we're going to say to use this as an archive template. So we'll just select that option. And when you do that, you see that kind of makes everything disappear. Don't worry though, that's very easy to rectify. All we need to do is come down to the settings section in the bottom left hand corner. Under our preview settings, we're going to change this from recent posts or anything you see inside there. We're going to change this to properties archive for this example. If you're working with a property type archive, you choose that just to see the data. So this is just all we need to do. Select that, hit apply and preview, and that will then show us the properties we've got set up. And you can see now, for some odd reason, when it comes to Elementor and so on, it now shows the icons as we'd expect them to be seen. Okay, so with that being done, we now have a lot more options available to us. We can choose things like lazy loading, and this just basically means if you have longer lists, this will only start to load in the information from anything that's outside of your viewport, in other words, anything that's underneath what you can see in your screen, and it'll start to load those in as you start to scroll down. Really useful if you want to have longer listings or with lots of images and things inside there, and you want to make sure that things load in pretty quickly. So enable that if it's relevant to you. Is masonry grid basically just means that if you have different size or scale images or different style or scale listings, you can specify that you use the masonry grid, and then it'll make a much nicer looking grid where it'll take up all the different spaces and make something look a little bit less random. You can also do equal column heights if you want to, and that will make sure that your columns are equal heights. And this is one of those weird things that doesn't always work the way you expect it to inside Jet Engine, but I would say let's leave it on there anyway. Load more, as its name would suggest. If you were using this to set up and you didn't want to put pagination in, you just want to literally allow people to scroll down and start loading in more entries as they become available as you scroll through, you could use that option inside there. You've also got the option that says use custom post types. If we enable that, we can then specify what post types from all the different kinds of post types we have that we want to display inside here. Now, we don't need to do that in this example because we've set this as an archive, and when you kind of filter things and you choose the archive that'll be for this particular property type, for example, or properties, it will sort all that out for you. But if you wanted to apply this and only display specific property types, post types, you could do that by just choosing the option inside there. We'll just uncheck that for now. Now, next up, you've got your custom query, your post query, your terms, and your users query. Now, these are where you can build your queries. However, this has kind of been superseded by a new feature called the Query Builder. So I'm not going to go into detail with these because I think the Query Builder gives us more scope for working effectively and a centralized location where we can build our queries and then we can apply them on different pages without having to go through the process of rebuilding them every single time. But I think this is something that is going to be superseded before too much longer, and these are definitely going to be something that will be dropped off in favor of the Query Builder. The other thing as well is it also makes it easier if you're using either Elementor or you're using Gutenberg to just kind of focus on using the Query Builder. All the options you can see inside these will be inside the Query Builder itself. So I'm not going to go into these today. We're going to keep all that goodness for the Query Builder video. When we come to the widget visibility, you can choose whether you want to hide the widget. So you can see we've got always show, or we can say if the query is empty, you want to hide this widget, at which point you could create an error message or a message to show something different. It's up to you. You could do it in a lot of different ways, but this is very useful if you do want to hide things. And then finally, you can convert this into a slider if you wanted to. And if you enable the slider option, you then have full control over how many slides to scroll, the angles, the navigation, all those kinds of things. For this example, I'm not going to set this to be a slider. And you can see you've also got the enable scroll slider. And again, you've got different options inside there. So if you want to change this from being a normal listing into a slider of various different types, you can do that with these options. Let's just disable that though. And then finally, you've got your style and your advanced, all the things you'd normally expect to see. So that's how we go about doing this. So let's just publish this, and now we can add a condition if we want to. And we say we don't want this for all archives, we just literally want this to be for the properties archive. Save and close. That's our template completed, and that's how we create our custom listing and insert that into our archive template. Now that we've explored how to use a pretty standard design and feature set, how about we delve into working with a combination of user data and some custom metadata fields? So in the previous videos, we took a look at how we could add some extra meta fields directly to the user profile. Let's go ahead and add one more inside there so we can upload our own avatar. We're not reliant upon the way that WordPress normally displays avatars. Gives us a bit more control. To do that, all we're going to do is head into Jet Engine and into our meta boxes option. And if you haven't seen the video for this, I would recommend taking a look at it because there's a lot of useful information in how to use these. So there's the additional user info meta box list that I set up previously. Let's open this up, and currently there are only two fields inside there, website and Facebook profile. Let's add another one in, and this time we're just going to call this user avatar, and we'll just set this to be a field type of media. So we can upload an image to it, and then we can set any kind of value format. So we're going to say this is going to be the media URL, and we'll just leave everything else as it is. We'll update that. Now, if we hop over into our user account, and this will apply to everybody that's a user, they can all log in and have access to these extra features. You can see I do already have a profile picture uploaded, but that's part of the way that Gravatar is set up, and not everybody uses Gravatar. So it's nice to have the option to be able to add your own custom images in for your own avatar. So for this example, I'll choose the image that I want to use, and I'm going to upload a slightly different variation so we can see the differences. So we're just going to call this avatar, and we'll just say choose our media, and there we go. That's our image associated with our account. We'll update our profile, and now we have some additional extra fields we can use when we're creating our particular Jet Engine listing. So let's just head back over to Jet Engine and into our listings and create our new listing. So as before, we'll just choose add new. The listing source is no longer going to be posts. We need to change that to be users in this example, and you can see that now changes the context of the options below. All we need to do is give this a name, and we're just going to call this user listing, and we'll leave it to use Elementor, but again, you can use Gutenberg if you prefer. So we're going to say create a listing item. This will then open up Elementor and allow us to start building things. So we're going to use pretty much exactly the same principles we saw before. We're just going to need to do a few different sources for where this information is going to come from. So first of all, let's just head into settings in the bottom corner, choose the listing settings. Users is already predefined as we know before because we've set that up to be the source. We're going to set this to be 400 like we did before, and we're not going to make this clickable. Okay, so let's come back to our widgets. First thing we can do is pull in a dynamic image. So we'll drag and drop that into place. Just select this, make a little bit of space around it, just so we can separate it. Okay, so with that being done, you can see it tries to pull in the post thumbnail, and we're not working with posts now, we're working with users. So we need to change this. So I'm going to change from post thumbnail, and you can see we have additional user info, user fields, which is the just meta fields we set up and associated with users. And you can see inside there, we've got one field available to us, which is the user avatar. We select that, and you can see that now pulls in the avatar that we just created and set as part of the meta fields associated with users. So really easy to do. And again, we have all the same kind of options. We can drop in custom meta fields, repeater keys, apply image URL prefixes, choose the image size, and so on. So I'm going to set this to be, let's try medium. That looks pretty good. Do we want the image to be linked? It's up to you. You could link this through, and you can see if we select that, we can change it from permalink, and we can set this to whatever values that we want. So you can see we've got things like website, Facebook profile, user avatar. These are additional fields. We can choose the permalink. We can go to options pages, tons of different options. So permalink would be perfectly fine. However, let's just disable that because I'm not bothered. We'll send to this, and we'll say everything else is pretty fine. If you want to apply a fallback image, you could have one of those typical sort of silhouette images. You could drop that inside there, and then anybody that doesn't have a profile image on avatar will show that one, or you can just simply choose the option to hide if the value is empty. Pretty cool, pretty easy. Let's come back in, and let's just say we want to grab a dynamic field this time. I'm going to drag and drop that underneath, and now it makes sense that we have the user's name. So we take a look at the source. We've got the usual post term user and so on, and you can see title is being pulled in, and we can select that from there, and we can just simply come down and find the information that we want. So under user, you can see we've got nickname, we've got display name, and so on. I'm going to choose display name. If I want to assign an icon, I can do something like that. So we can easily just add in a user icon, choose an icon from there, style that however we want to. So all those options are there available to us, including the fallback, and we can filter the information and things along those lines. So you can see you can very quickly and easily build up this information. Let's just add another field in. Let's just duplicate this one for ease. And what we're going to do is we'll select it and we'll change the source from display name, and we're going to set this to registration date. And you can see that will then eventually pull through the registration date, and it pulls it through in a server format. So this isn't really a good format. It doesn't really mean a lot for most use cases. And again, this is where we can use the filter field output option to control the callback and specify we want to format the date in a certain way. So I format the date in localized, and you can see underneath that gives us the month, the day, and the year format. But we can change that if we want to, and you can see there's documentation here on different types of formatting. And we can, if we want to, then obviously change this, and we'll put a calendar in there, for example. And we'll insert that. And if we wanted to, we could put in using the customized data output, and we could say registration date. And you can see that puts the information after it. So really easy to start using it, and we can easily build up custom layouts for lots of different options. So this is a good example of how you can use information to create a list of all the users. Now, our final example will utilize the custom taxonomy we created in a previous video in the series. Link in the corner and in the description if you want to check that out. We'll take the principles we've looked at in our previous examples and combine those skills to build a custom taxonomy listing template and archive page. So I've already come ahead and jumped into listings and started to create a new listing. So what we're going to do first of all is change this listing source. This time we're going to choose the option for terms. Then you can see from taxonomy, we can choose to open up and choose any of the taxonomies, both inbuilt WordPress taxonomies and also any custom taxonomies we've created. For our example, we're going to use our property type taxonomy. We're going to give this a name and we're just going to call this property type listing, and we'll use Elementor. Create our listing as we've seen before. And we now go through the same process. So let's just minimize these items and we're going to drag and drop in our dynamic image, drop that inside there, make a little bit of space for this. So we've seen how to do all this before, and also jump into the settings and set this up to make sure that everything is correct, property type, and set this to be 400 pixels wide. Okay, so we've done the first things. So the source post thumbnail is not necessarily what we want in this example. So let's again open that up. And under property type, which is our custom taxonomy, you can see there's our custom field we've associated with it, custom meta field, which our property type image. We'll select that. There's our property type image. All the same options are available to us. We can control the size of the image. We can control the spacing, whether it's linked, hide it, drop a fallback image inside there. So all the things you've seen before. We're going to do one more thing. We're going to just drag and drop in dynamic field like we did before. You can see title doesn't make sense, but the post term, user object, so on, that's perfectly fine. Again, we can open this up and you can see we've got term name, term description, and post count. So let's say the term name is what we want, and you can see there's apartments. We can set that to be something like H4 if we want to. We could also come into, for example, into advanced, I should say, and we're going to come down into the positioning, and we're going to set this up inside here to be inline. And you can see that now allows us to control the positioning of this using some custom CSS kind of styling through positioning and so on. So what we're going to do is we'll leave that as it is. We're going to duplicate this. So we'll duplicate that from there. And what we're going to do is change this information. So we're going to come back in and we're going to change the object field from term name to post count. And this will then give us a count of how many different properties have this property type associated with them. So it's an easy way of being able to sort of drop in a number of properties that are inside a particular taxonomy. Those kinds of things can be really useful. And then we can simply use some spacing and so on to give us some room around this. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of a margin on the left and right hand side. So we'll just say 10 pixels. And we'll do 10 pixels on the right as well. And if we wanted to, we can then come back into our content, into customize the field output, and we can simply put in brackets around this. So we can kind of segregate that off a little bit, and that makes a little bit more sense now. We can also come in and we can say we want to add in some dynamic data. So we'll drop that underneath there, making sure this is in position. Now, sometimes you find when you start to use these positioning options, it can get a little bit confusing where you drag and drop items, but all you need to do is just open up the navigator and you can see there's our dynamic fields, and we could just reposition that where we want it to be. That now drops in the right place. So don't worry if you have that happen to you, it's very easy to rectify. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to just pull in some additional information. So again, post term user object is fine. We'll expand that out and we're going to say the term description, and that will put the description inside there. And if we want, we can use the filter field output option to make that a little smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down. Unfortunately, like I say, you still can't see this, but trim string to chars. And we're going to say we'll set that to be 200 characters. And you can see that now gives us a more sort of bite-sized section of information inside there. Now you could easily go ahead and add extra meta fields to your different taxonomies, and then you could use those to create this kind of listing inside here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say we're happy with that. We'll say update it. Once we've done that, we're going to hop back out of here, exit to our dashboard, and we're just going to create a template for this using Elementor. So we're going to come into templates, into our theme builder, and inside there we can now create a new archive. So we're going to open up the archive options, and inside there we'll just create a new archive, and we're going to call this property type archive, and we'll create our template. We'll go past these. We're going to create something ourselves, and what we're going to do is we're going to do a search like we've done before for listing. We'll drop our listing grid inside there, make a little bit of space above and below, just to keep things nice and neat and tidy. And as always, we get to choose what listing we want to use. So we're going to come into our content, change our listing, and we're just going to search for type. And you can see there's our property type listing. We can select that from there. And you can see that now pulls in the apartment we just set up. And if we add additional ones inside here, they'll all show up and be listed. We can now go ahead, lay this out, design it, do whatever we want with it, set up all the different options we saw earlier in this video. What I'm going to do though is going to come to publish. We're going to add our condition, and inside there we're going to change this from all archives. We only want this to associate with property type. So once we select that, you can choose whether this is going to apply this template to all of those property types, or whether just you want to choose particular property types. I'm going to leave it set to all and save and close. And we've now created an archive specifically for our custom taxonomy. We've designed the layout of that, all the information, pull the data in, all directly using the listing feature inside Jet Engine. Now that we've looked at some examples of working with listings, you have a great way to start displaying your new custom post listings. To continue learning, click on this link next. It'll help you get more out of Jet Engine. And if you found this video useful, please consider hitting that thumbs up button. It really does help. However, if you didn't find the video useful, well, feel free to hit the thumbs down button twice, as that seems to work pretty well too. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.